All right. Hello, everybody. I hope you all are doing well. We're back and we have a gigantic slate on deck. For those of you that don't know, I'm Bob226, aka Josiah. This is the NBA Tournament Strategy Show where usually we look at the previous slate, see what happened. But on this one, we can't do that. There weren't any NBA games yesterday. But instead, we've been gifted with a ton today. And then, of course, later today, we have our pre lock show, which is for VIP members only. Feel free to click the link in the description if you are interested in that. But we have too many games today to play around with. So let's just go ahead and jump into this slate, talk about the guys we like. And then, like I said, on the pre-lock show, we'll go over how we are utilizing the domination station, who are the leverage plays, core plays, all that fun stuff. This slate is a little bit better than the rest of the week will be. We have a lot of games this week, but at least today we already have a decent amount of the news. Later this week, I think might be a little bit more like Friday and the weekend where we're going to have a lot more questionable tags. Still a lot of questionable tags, but it's better today than it will be. What's up, Michael Ortiz? Good to see you, man. We're getting close to the end of the season, guys. I appreciate you for sticking it out with me for this long season, but it's been a lot of good in there. Some bad, but a lot of good in there. But starting off the Raptors, we have OG Anunoby listed as questionable. Gary Trent Jr. is listed as questionable. Barton's probable, and then Precious Achua is listed as questionable. I think the big news here is when OG's out, that's a boost to Scotty Barnes, more willing to play Siakam, Van Fleet, Podol. Exact same story of Gary Trent Jr. When they're both out, honestly, all the starters would be close, not locks on this large slate, but I would want to be double the field on all of their starters if both OG and Gary Trent Jr. were out. Whereas if it's just one of them, I just want to make sure I'm increasing exposure. I don't think anyone's going to be surprised here. I'm playing bigs against the Hornets. We've been doing it all year. Hopefully their ownership remains low, but Jakob Poeltl getting 15-20% of him will be pretty easy for me to do. 20% on Siakam. I'm still debating if I want him to be a true leverage play, but he's definitely on my radar as a big to utilize against the Hornets. And then Fred VanVleet, I'm open to having exposure to, but like I said, I'm more interested in playing FVV and Scotty Barnes if OG and or Gary Trent Jr. are out. So a team I like a lot on this slate. The spread is super wide, which is scary and why they're going to be low owned. But that's the risk you just kind of have to take with them. With the Hornets, these guys, they're done. Terry Rozier's out. PJ Washington's out. Kelly Oubre's out. Gordon Hayward's out. Dennis Smith Jr. is questionable. That does matter. Dennis Smith Jr. being questionable is really the news that's going to move the needle on how viable these Hornets are for me tonight. Mark Williams is probable. Cody Martin's out. LaMelo Ball's been out for a while. We've been seeing the Hornets utilize a nice little rotation when it comes to their bigs here. I think if Mark Williams plays tonight, that's going to make Nick Richards, your JT Thors, your Kai Jones a little bit worse plays, but still viable because of their price tag. You'll realize that a lot of these Hornet guys are no names, but they're still like 6K, 5K. They're priced pretty appropriately in my mind. No one's really standing out too much where it's like, oh, I really need to have this guy in my lineup. JT Thor, again, is like projecting well and he's fine. But with Mark Williams being probable, I'm not super excited about it. Not a guy I'm going to X out of my player pool. Like, I'm fine having exposure to JT Thor tonight, but I don't want him to be a core player or anything like that. And if I'm going to be over the field, unless we just become that desperate for value, but just a guy I probably don't want more than like 30% of or 40. Dave, what's up, man? Good to see you. And thanks. Yeah, definitely, guys, do hit the like, share, and subscribe button. I know it's the end of the season and views are going down, all that stuff. So it's always helpful when you guys show that you're still sticking it out with me if you could like. But I know life happens, so no worries. It is the end of the season, so it happens. But yeah, guys, the Hornets aren't super exciting for me right now because I feel like they're priced pretty appropriately for the role that they play. A lot more exciting plays towards the end of the slate. For the Cavaliers, let's see. They're pretty healthy. Okoro's been out. Wendler's been out. Nothing really too insane here. I am not extremely interested in these guys outside of just kind of like taking shots on low owned players. Donovan Mitchell at 9,100 is on my radar as a potential leverage play. I like his upside. I like the matchup against the Magic. I like his ownership. And so he's at super low ownership, and 9,100 really isn't that expensive, is viable for me. Also, just a 5 point spread. I like it. I do wish there was an injury or something like that on this team. So we saw a little bit of an increase in usage for him. So it make it like a much easier decision for me. But he's one of those like out of maybe like the 15, 20 studs on this slate, he's one of like 8 that are on my list as potential leverage plays. So I like him a lot. Darius Garland, I feel like we've been playing him all the time. I do prefer to play Garland when Allen is out. But Garland at 7,500 still makes sense for me here. I don't think he's a bad play by any means. Sim Model still likes him as well. It's hard for me to find a great reason to not play him outside of he's just relatively kind of popular on this slate, but I think he makes sense. I'm not going to try to limit him as of right now, at least. For the Magic, you guys know I admit my biases, and when they're healthy, like they are right now, Admiral Schofield's the only guy who's really questionable for this team. They just don't stand out for me a lot. And when they're healthy in a difficult matchup against the Cavs, probably not going to get here, unfortunately. They are low owned, so you can make an argument here to take a shot on their low ownership, but that's pretty much it for me. Next up, we have the Bucks. Now, tell me if you've seen this before. We have the Bucks, we have Chris Middleton out, and there's a gigantic spread. And Drew Holiday's low owned. I feel like we've seen this play out a few times this season. And my rule of thumb is I'm going to play Drew when Chris Middleton's out. We already know Chris Middleton's out. We already know Grayson Allen's out. Everyone else is playing. Those two things just kind of go hand in hand for me. And so if Drew Holiday's really going to be that low owned, then I can put like a 5-10% min on Drew Holiday and call it a day. Giannis, we've been able to play bigs against the Wizards all season. I am fine with where his ownership is. I feel like that's probably pretty appropriate. Ideally, I don't have to force exposure to him, and I'll just be close to around field weight, but we'll have to keep an eye out for it. I want at least 10% Giannis on this slate. I don't want to fade him completely in this spot, but I don't, because of his ownership, he's not someone I feel like I have to have tonight. I'm just comfortable having some exposure. And then Drew Holiday is really the one I want to be over the field on. Is that it? Anyone else really stand out for me? You do see like a little bit of a boost to Connaughton and Carter here from a projection standpoint with Middleton out. That's good to see. But on a slate this size, I think we should have better value on this slate than trying to take shots on this team here. And then we have the Wizards, a team that's also been pretty unhealthy here lately, which means they're a team I like. We have Bradley Beal listed as out. Kyle Kuzma is listed as out. Kristaps Porzingis is out. Monty Morris is out. That's quite a few high usage guys that this team's going to be without tonight, which means that the Wizards are a team that I want to make sure I have exposure to. Avdija was awful in his last spot like this. It's a tough matchup against the Bucks. He's priced pretty appropriately, but I will be over the field if he's going to be this low owned. He does see a nice increase in usage rate. His shot wasn't falling last time out. That's why he was 3 for 9, I believe. So that's why his scoring was so awful. But if that shot falls, he's breaking the slate. I do think on this slate, he's not a necessity, and that's why he's low owned. But he is someone that I think has the upside and is priced appropriately to still be able to break a slate. So if, again, as long as his ownership doesn't increase to around like 10 to 15%, which I think is where it should be, I'm willing to be in that 10 to 15% range and get some decent leverage on him. Oh, that's funny. Literally, I just got the notification that Avdija is going to be out. So, that leverage play we were talking about, that was actually kind of a little scary, to be honest, because he's pretty expensive, is bullcrap. And since he's going to be out, we don't have to worry about it. But it does mean that all of the Wizards are even better plays than we thought previously. Corey Kispert is probably going to end up being the super chalk on this slate. And with Avadija gone, I think that's for a really good reason. Delon Wright is already projecting well. We already see really high ownership on him, really high ownership on Goodwin. I'm going to need to crunch some numbers and see who really sees the biggest boost with Beal, Kuzma, Porzingis, Morris, and Avadija out. I think we'll see some sneaky. Hopefully, there's a few guys in here, like maybe like a Kendrick Nunn or Anthony Gill feels really bad, but maybe Anthony Gill, who are just really low owned in these spots. Maybe it's Johnny Davis, who's not getting a lot of ownership because he's another low usage guy. Uh, but I'm willing to take some shots here in this game on some low owned Wizards. So I'm looking forward to seeing where we land on the pre-lock show. This is per usual a Miami Heat game with a pretty wide spread and the lowest total on the slate. That sets up for a game environment that I'm not going to have a lot of exposure to. Let's see. Also, the Heat are pretty freaking healthy, which is also why I don't plan on having exposure to it. Bam Adebayo is probable. If that changed, that's a dramatic impact that would switch things for me. Kyle Lowry's questionable. Not the same guy he used to be. Less impactful, but it does mean that Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, the usual guys do see a bit of a boost. We have seen Tyler Hero have breakout performances in these spots when Kyle Lowry doesn't play. So he's definitely much more viable there. Max Strus is a bit of a boost as well. But again, I think we have better value plays on this slate, in my opinion, and better game environments. Jimmy Butler, though, at 5% ownership does feel a little bit too low owned, in my opinion. But the spread is kind of, and the low game total is really just kind of keeping me off it. But I'm interested. I'm intrigued. When I see the low ownership in a game, if Kyle Lowry ends up missing this game, I am a little bit more intrigued by Jimmy Butler if he stays that low owned. Amazement. Good to see you. Wow. Well, I'm glad I played Kispert last night before they took him off the board. Oh, yeah. Well, I know you mean Sunday. But I'm glad it worked out for you, man. I'm glad that worked out for you. I didn't play on Sunday, so I wasn't really in the swing of things. Yeah. But, I mean, I think there's viable plays from the Heat, but it's not a game I'm going to have a lot of exposure to, full transparency. For the Pistons, we have Marvin Bagley listed as out. The guys who are always freaking out for this team, they're just like the Hornets. They have a lot of guys who are out quite often. They're all priced pretty appropriately for a relatively tough matchup here against the Heat. We've seen Jaden Ivey and Wiseman and Duran have some strong performances, but this isn't a spot where I'm really trying to force exposure to it. We do see some decent ownership on Hayes and Duran. And again, they do have guys out, and we have seen them overcome these kind of plays, but I'm just not a fan of it. Oh, okay, good. Yeah, no, it's sad because it went from like Kispert being a little bit of a sneaky play that other people aren't going to be on to now he's probably going to be super chalky. But I'm here for it. I'm going to be on board, but hopefully we can find some Wizards who will be a little bit sneaky. Kispert was going to be that guy though. For the Timberwolves against the Nets, oh, yeah, for the Pistons, I'm not really interested. It's the low game total and the tough matchup for me. Timberwolves, we have more news that we need to wait for. So Karl-Anthony Towns is listed as questionable. He's fighting a sickness. He was not very good last time out when he was playing with a sickness, but hey, he's still going to keep trying to go strong now. The Nets are not a team I like to pick on very often. I don't plan on having a lot of exposure to the Timberwolves tonight unless Karl-Anthony Towns ends up getting ruled out. When Cat is out, I play Anthony Edwards and Rudy Gobert. When Cat is in, not as interested, and I don't try and force those kind of exposures. I just don't like this team when they're healthy. Austin Rivers is questionable. Jalen Noel's questionable. Those two don't move the needle as much for me as Cat does. For the Nets, we have Ben Simmons out. That's pretty much all that matters here. Everyone else is healthy and priced appropriately. We had fun with the Cam Johnson leverage plays for a while. That worked out well. We played Mikal Bridges and Spencer Dinwiddie a good bit recently, but they were a little bit cheaper. They're priced appropriately now and in a tougher matchup, and so no one's really standing out for me too much. But again, because they're lower owned, I'm open to taking shots here, but at least as of right now, not where I'm planning on forcing exposure to because of the matchup, and I just feel like they're priced appropriately. I think we'll find better spots, and we already have found better spots in some of the earlier games. Like, I like the Raptors low-owned guys more than the guys from these games. Wider spread, but I'm willing to take the risk on that one. All right, for the Hawks. Who's healthy? I think they're pretty good tonight, outside of Trey, which is gonna be big. Trey Young is questionable, and then DeAndre Hunter's out. We've already seen a few of these guys, like um, we've already seen a few of these players like have an increasing usage because Hunter's out, and we've seen Bay enter the starting lineup, which is nice to see. But what really, really matters in this matchup is the Trey Young questionable tag. If Trey Young's out, we already know we're playing more DeJounte Murray, we're playing more Bogdan Bogdanovic. Those are the two guys who see the biggest boost. Sadiq Bey is already the value option because DeAndre Hunter is out, and he should start unless they try to get weird with the starting lineup. But as long as Sadiq Bey starts, he's a really good chalky option on this slate. I don't like talking about chalky plays too much because everyone knows to play them, so it's not really that surprising. The matchup's tough, but again, he should be starting. I think Sadiq Bey is an even better value option if Trey Young ends up getting ruled out, because Sadiq Bey can be a usage monster himself. So yeah, I like the Hawks primarily only if Trey Young's out. But outside of that, if Trey Young plays, Sadiq Bey will probably be the only Hawk I have a decent amount of exposure to. All right, moving on. We have the Bulls. The Bulls are healthy. We've been on the Vucevic train for a while, and that's worked out very, very well for us. I still like Vucevic. I feel like I just keep doing the same thing. But when the Bucks are healthy, when the Bulls are healthy, I don't really like playing a ton of DeRozan and Levine. The matchup is soft for Zach Levine, so I do understand why he's getting a little bit more exposure, why he's projecting pretty well. But if all things were even, I still prefer Vucevic over Zach Levine. So that's who I'm going to prioritize is Vucevic tonight. Definitely on my radar as a leverage play tonight. If Zach Levine ends up showing up in my lines because the Domination Station still likes him a lot, I'm fine with that too. But preference is Vucevic. Y'all, these spreads are horrendous tonight. Yeah, so the Trailblazers, thank God they're not on the last game of this slate tonight, because we never know what the hell they're going to do, if I'm being honest with you. All of their starters aren't playing right now, but even their backup guys are questionable, and they have a ton of questionable tags. So Trendon Watford, who we've seen break multiple slates, is questionable. Kevin Knox, who's been that guy for us here recently, is questionable. Matisse Thybulle is questionable. And his price tag isn't too outrageous these days. Cam Reddish is questionable. John Butler is questionable. Few guys are out. We're really going to need the starting lineup for this team. The only guy that we really know and can really trust here is Drew Eubanks at 5,800. Another viable big on this slate. Should be relatively chalky. I like the spot for him. Shaedon Sharpe, we were able to get in on early, but now he's 8K. And 8K for the rookie is going to see a ton of minutes. I understand the argument for, but unfortunately, he's in there entering that range where I just think there's better options available. So I don't think he's unplayable, but I'm not going to have a lot of Shaedon Sharpe exposure. At least I'm not going to force it. I do want to see what the rest of this starting lineup looks like. I mean, Skylar Mays is priced pretty appropriately, so he doesn't really move the needle for me too much. But if like Matisse Thybulle and Trendon Watford end up being out, I can't wait to see what value options come out from that. So that's what I'm looking forward to here. All right. Whew. A lot of games here. For the Grizzlies, Dylan Brooks is questionable. We've seen when he's out, Rhodey play and see some run, but Rhodey is a pretty low usage guy, so he doesn't do too much while he's out there. For me, the biggest thing is if Dylan Brooks is out, that makes guys like John Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. more interesting. The tough part is that this is just a really bad game environment where this is the largest spread on the slate. It does have a pretty high game total, but still far from like the top. I'm interested in John Morant because of his low ownership, but I would be lying to you if I told you I think this game stays close and he's able to exceed that value. But John Morant will, I'll be over the field on John Morant for sure because of that low ownership. So it's a scary, super risky play. More likely than not, won't work out, but super soft matchup, low owned, love his upside are all enough reasons for me to be over the field on him. And he's even a better play if Brooks ends up sitting out tonight. For the Kings, Malik Monk is questionable. That kind of matters, but the Kings have a ton of streaky shooters. And so, per usual, the Kings probably won't be a team I have a ton of exposure to. It does look like De'Aaron Fox at 7,700 is a little bit too cheap for the upside he brings to the table. So I do think he's a viable play. He can't be a leverage play for me tonight because I think his ownership's already pretty much where it should be. For the upside he has on the table. So I plan on being around field weight on Fox. I want to make sure I have exposure to him tonight. But outside of that, the rest of these Kings guys don't move. I'm not very excited about. If Monk's out, then I'm more interested in Fox. You can make an argument for taking more shots on guys like Hoyter and Barnes, but primarily I'm focusing on Fox here, and that's pretty much it. For the Pelicans, they're in a good spot. You can always play whoever's facing the Kings, and unfortunately, Ingram and CJ both have decent ownership projections. And again, it's because they're in a really good spot. I have absolutely nothing bad to say about them outside of their pretty high ownership projections, which is what gets me a little nervous. With that being said, though, CJ McCollum still has a ton of upside. And so I just kind of have to pick between the two, and it's whoever's the lowest owned and whoever's upside I feel like is a little bit higher and he's cheaper. So there's a lot of things going into it for me, but CJ McCollum's going to be the guy that I'm going to be over the field on here. Uh, I think Brandon Ingram's probably more of like your safer play, who I feel pretty good about in this matchup, but I like CJ McCollum for being a little bit lower owned and cheaper. I can get to some other guys who are a little bit lower owned because I have a play like CJ McCollum who can go off at any moment as long as his shot falls. So I like CJ here. The other Pelicans are viable, but CJ is really the main one I'm forcing in my lineups tonight. The Nuggets. Oh man. The Nuggets have been pretty healthy this year, but now they're starting to give us the questionable tags, especially with Nikola Jokic. He's not been a big questionable guy very often, but tonight he is. Super low ownership, super ton of upside, great matchup. There's a lot of things that make Jokic viable, but as we all know, if Jokic doesn't play, then we move to Murray, we move to Brown, we move to Porter Jr., we move to Gordon. All those guys become better plays in a fantastic matchup against the Rockets. The Jokic news means a lot to me personally on this slate because of how soft of a matchup it is against the Rockets. If Jokic plays, I do want a little bit of Jokic exposure, but I don't feel like this is a must-have situation. But if he's out, I do feel like this is a game you really need exposure to. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with the news, but that's a really big impact. We've also seen Jeff Green see a lot of run or see decent run, like late, like high 20 minutes when Jokic has been out. So he would be another viable value option on this slate if Jokic ended up missing this game. I pray to God we get that news sooner rather than later, but we'll have to wait and see what happens there. For the Rockets, they're pretty healthy. You know, we have Jayshawn Tate, we have Ty Washington. We've been playing guards against this Nuggets team pretty often. We stopped recently because the Nuggets have improved defensively here lately. But Green has had some strong performances before against the Nuggets. Again, still not my favorite spot, to be honest with you. When this team is healthy, they just don't stand out for me as much. Shungen is projecting well. He hasn't been as strong of a performer as he was earlier in the season, but he would be more viable for me, especially if Jokic ended up getting ruled out. So I'll need to look a little bit closer at Shungen before I feel like actually good about it. But I think there's a case to be made there for him. But yeah, in general, not a lot of interest in them. Other teams I like a lot more. All right, 4 more games. Getting a little tight on time, so we're going to move quickly. For the Celtics, tough matchup against the Sixers is never an environment that we love for daily fantasy purposes. But the good thing is that the spread's pretty close, the total's not bad, and so it should be a competitive game environment, which sometimes does result in decent results for daily fantasy. So, two things that kind of go back and forth. Probably going to play this team more when we actually reach the playoffs. But the thing that really matters here is Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown's questionable. Robert Williams, we already know, is out. Al Horford was not on the injury report. So we have a decent bit to watch out for. So with the knowledge that um, knowing that Brown could be out, I think we already know, we saw it last week. Derek White, or maybe it wasn't last week, I don't know. But we saw Derek White have a really big performance in a similar spot. Malcolm Brogdon sees a boost, and then obviously Tatum sees a nice boost as well in usage rates. And so I would have some interest here, especially in Derek White, if we get that Brown news. And then there's no way Tatum would only be 1% owned, but he would have to do a lot of the heavy lifting in this spot against the Sixers tonight. So I would definitely increase my exposure to him as well. So interesting game. I just don't know if we'll get the news in time. I hope we do. But, if he's there, if we know, I'll make sure we do the right things on the pre-lock show. If he's not, we'll just have to try and late swap it. The Sixers are pretty healthy tonight. Matchup against the Celtics isn't my favorite, to be honest. Not a team I plan on having a lot of exposure to. I'm not really interested in Joel Embiid. I do think James Harden has some upside in this spot, so he's a little bit interesting to me, but honestly, just not on board with these guys. I like other studs more, who I've already talked about. For the Lakers, Anthony Davis came through last week for us. So am I biased a little bit? Maybe. But I still like this spot for him. We've been able to play bigs against the Jazz more often than not this season. They're not a great defensive team or anything like that to be afraid of. LeBron James is questionable. Obviously, Davis is a better play if LeBron James is out. But I think last week, even with LeBron James returning, Davis still had a fantastic game. So I like Davis tonight. He's going to be extremely low owned, so we don't have to do a lot to get decent leverage on him. Like, you could even have just 5%. If you're 150ing, if you're only doing 20 lines, I think 10%, 15% is probably an appropriate amount too, for 20 maxing. But I like Davis tonight. I like the matchup. I like his low ownership. I like his upside. The rest of the crew for Lakers tonight, I'm not interested in forcing. Remember, I like the domination station still add these guys in. So it's not a complete fade, but I'm always talking about what guys I'm forcing exposure to. For the Jazz, per usual, we have a few questionable tags with them. Lauri Markkanen's questionable. Colin Sexton's questionable. So Colin Sexton, if he does return, he should see some sort of limit, you would assume. But him returning would make guys like THT and Chris Dunn just much less viable, in my opinion. Austin Smith said, do you think Lakers stood a stud with them playing the Clippers tomorrow? I mean, they already do have LeBron James listed as questionable. So, I mean, if they're going to, it would be him. Which is kind of why I like already being over the field to Anthony Davis, because he's going to be a hard guy for people to pivot to if we get that news that LeBron James is going to be out late. So short answer, I don't know, but I like having Anthony Davis exposure just in case. Okay. So yeah, with the Jazz, I think with the potential of Sexton returning, I'm less interested in this team as a whole. If he's out, then I do think if he's out and Lauri Markkanen's out, I think we can play the usual Jazz guys that we've been playing for a while now that are viable on the slate. but I do think we will have better value in some of the earlier games. So I don't think we'll have to play these guys. But if we get the news early enough, I'm willing to force some exposure to the situation. Probably just around like 5% on like THT, maybe like 10% on Kelly O, 5% on Dunn, 5% on Obaji. If we get that news early enough, just make sure I have some exposure, but not one of those spots where I feel like we have to play it with the news in some of the earlier games already. SGA and crew, the Thunder, they're pretty healthy. They do have a soft matchup tonight against the Warriors, so that's always nice to see. SGA at low ownership is always someone that I want to look at in those kind of spots. Sim Model's not a big fan of SGA. The ownership's low. I like the matchup, so it's a spot I'm going to need to dig a little bit deeper at because I don't have like the same conviction to be like, oh, okay, definitely a highly likely leverage play kind of guy for me. But unfortunately, just the way things are looking out for this slate and some of the other studs I already like a bit more that we've talked about, it's probably going to be hard for me to get to SGA tonight. Can't play everyone, unfortunately. Rest of the Thunder, I don't love either. Now, the Warriors are projecting better tonight against a pretty bad Thunder team. Andrew Wiggins is still going to be out, but I think he'll be returning here soon. Let's see. Curry, 10,600. Curry at extremely low ownership, probably no surprise. We've had him in like Anthony Davis as leverage plays quite often, and again, it's been going pretty well. But yeah, 1% ownership in a soft matchup. Spread is 8, so like not great. But again, I like the spot for him. Very likely he'll be a leverage play for me tonight. Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Kevin Looney, Dante DiVincenzo, they all project well. I do think we have better value options in some of the earlier games. So not guys I'm going to force exposure to, but I do realize that this is a decent spot for them. So I'm not going to try and like X them out of my player pool or anything, but I like other spots in some of the earlier games a bit more, but we'll still have exposure to those guys too. For the Spurs, have a pretty long list here. Keldon Johnson is doubtful. Zach Collins is questionable. Vassell is out. Sachan is out. Similar to some of the other bad teams here, everyone's starting to get priced pretty appropriately here. I know Doug McDermott and some of the other weird names had some big scoring performances here recently. I wouldn't bet on that to happen again. I do think like if Keldon Johnson's out, Zach Collins is definitely a much more viable play for me. We do have bigs who are in better spots. So unless we just got that news really, really early, I wouldn't have Zach Collins exposure kind of going into it. Trey Jones is viable, but again, I do like some of the value in some of the early games a bit more. And I like the matchups a bit more. So kind of like Klay Thompson with the Warriors, I'm fine having exposure to him, but he's not someone I'm going to force exposure to unless something just dramatically changes for me tonight. Doug McDermott, Champagne, yeah, I'm fine with where they're at too. Didn't move the needle for me too much. And I was wrong. That Portland game was not the widest spread. It's actually the Suns game. There's so many huge spreads. This team's healthy. They're trying to get into playoff shape. Obviously, one of the best matchups on the board. I think you can make an argument for Kevin Durant at 8,900. If he sees decent minutes here, this is a ceiling spot for him, in my opinion. I think DeAndre Ayton's a really, really good play tonight against this really bad Spurs team. He's only 6,200, so he's not too expensive. So I have Kevin Durant on my radar as a potential leverage play. DeAndre Ayton, I can almost guarantee I'll be over the field on. So 2 guys I like a lot in this game, but we'll have to wait and see where we actually fall when we get to the pre-lock show. So, yeah, guys, this is the last week of the regular season. We'll be back for the playoffs, but wild slate, I always say, like, be prepared for crazy things to happen. We'll get a lot of weird late injury news. The last week is when a lot of people fall off. Is when a lot of people start to get a little lazy. So definitely do try to keep your brain with you. But I appreciate you all. I look forward to seeing you all on the pre-lock show at 5:30 p.m. Eastern time. And I wish you all the best of luck tonight. Peace out, guys.